Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and others telling you that food would be cheaper if you voted to leave the European Union. And now, as an absolutely irrefutable consequence of the Brexit they delivered, food is going to be more expensive. Radio presenters even, who encouraged you to vote to leave the European Union, who will be disarmingly silent on the latest unavoidable proof that it was one of the stupidest things any population in history has ever done to itself. But how annoyed are you with that analysis, right? Because if you knew this was going to happen, if you were dismissive and cynical about so-called Project Fear, if you were perhaps informed on the issues, you understood what was likely or guaranteed to happen, you're probably not that annoyed with the analysis that I just shared. But if you voted for it and you are now, or indeed have for some time been regretful, then I may have just offended you. You may have heard, although I didn't say it, you may have heard me calling you stupid. You may have thought you heard me insulting you. When I start hitting this drum, which I don't hit with as much enthusiasm as I used to do because I don't know how it unfolds. I don't know how the damage gets repaired. But when I start hitting this drum, you start looking away or getting cross or turning over maybe. I hope not. Come back. And that is one way into the conversation today. Let's have a look, shall we, at how events in London this morning are being reported in America, shall we, on CNN. The United Kingdom does not feed itself, relying heavily on the European Union for fresh fruit and vegetables. That dependency has changed little since Britain left the bloc in 2020 and could now mean more pain for consumers and small businesses. Tuesday, that's today, marks the beginning of the long-delayed introduction of post-Brexit physical inspections of plant and animal imports from the EU. The spot checks will apply initially to products such as meat, cheese and some fish, and eventually to a range of vegetables and fruit. I could go on. There's a variety of quotes from industry experts and industry groups describing thousands of pounds in extra costs each month for a typical business. Eddie Price at the Birmingham wholesale market, which houses around 50 businesses selling meat, fish, vegetables, flowers, describes the dismay and the concerns about higher costs and delays at the border that his people are fearing. The government estimates the checks will cost about £330 million, but they've shared absolutely no information about how they've arrived at such a low figure, while the Cold Chain Federation, which represents businesses delivering goods that need chill storage, has put the border measures closer to £1 billion a year in costs exclusively to firms trading perishable produce. That's before fruit and vegetables are even brought into the mix. The CEO of that federation, a rather splendidly named chap called Phil Pluck. You need to take a long run up at that one. It's a little bit like the North Kent Hunt. You don't want to be verbally or orally lazy when you're talking about Phil Pluck, do you? No, you don't. Well, I tell you what if Phil Pluck was a member of the North Kent Hunt? That would be a radio presenter and indeed a newsreader's nightmare, wouldn't it? Keith's finger has never hovered more menacingly above the dump button than when I moot the prospect of Phil Pluck being a member of the North Kent Hunt. But I digress. He has described a significant increase in food prices and reduction in choice, adding, "We also believe that this will seriously threaten the viability of small and medium-sized enterprises operating within food retail, such as small garden centres, restaurants and delicatessens." On it goes. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't know how. Well, look, I am interested in how it's affecting you directly. Although, of course, some of the consequences will not yet have become clear. But I've told you, I've been telling you for some time, haven't I, that I need a new jam. Actually, I think jam probably will be subject to new checks coming in from Europe. But I need a new jam. I've needed a new jam for some time. Content for the con men, compassion for the conned, still holds. But now, if you are still contending that this was a good idea in any way, or that the people who sold it to you are in any way, what's the word I want, trustworthy, then I no longer have much compassion for you. I have a little bit. The ease with which people can be persuaded to believe things that are absolutely and completely untrue never ceases to amaze me. Happens in all sorts of different fields, and also people who would ordinarily perhaps consider themselves to be immune to the lure of, say, an online conspiracy theory can find themselves caught up in them to the shock of everybody around the place. So believing things that are not true is not something that automatically earns you the disapproval or the disgust of your peers. But once the evidence becomes incontrovertible, once, for example, Jacob Rees-Mogg's claim that food would be cheaper is dismantled by Jacob Rees-Mogg complaining about the checks, which I don't think he fully understands are a complete consequence of the Brexit that he brought in, that he dreamt of and helped to deliver. When the person who promised you cheap food is complaining about the consequences of more expensive food, or the causes of more expensive food, and the cause of the more expensive food is literally the thing that he told you would bring in cheaper food, then what do you do? What do you do? Do you put your fingers in your ears, close your eyes and just go la 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 la? I know people who do that in real life. I know at least one grown man who now responds to reminders of what he did during the Brexit debate by putting his fingers in his ears, closing his eyes and going la 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 la. I suspect there's people in the cabinet who respond to reminders of what they did during the Brexit conversation and what is happening now as a consequence of their either foolishness, ignorance, idiocy, or delusion. I don't know what word you want to use, but they put their fingers in their ears, they close their eyes, and they go la 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 la. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. So while I am very interested in how it is going to affect you, if you have got a business in this field, I'm also interested in people who are beginning to climb down. Now, I haven't necessarily, over the last few years, provided the most warm and welcoming environment in which you can undertake an admission of error, in which you can say, do you know what? Even if I focus it down, if I zone it right down to the Jacob Rees-Mogg conundrum. So if just that simple thing, Jacob Rees-Mogg told you that food would be cheaper and you believed him. And now you're discovering that food is going to be more expensive. And there is going to be less choice because smaller companies will not operate. Small exporters won't want to do the paperwork to send stuff to Birmingham when they could just send the same goods, the finite amount of goods that they have to sell, to Berlin instead. And companies here will therefore not be able to operate in the way that they currently do. So that very simple, focused question of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and others telling you that food would be cheaper if you voted to leave the European Union, and now as an absolutely irrefutable consequence of the Brexit they delivered, food is going to be more expensive. It's rare that you have a moment of such ineffable clarity. Absolute clarity. There's no room here for he said, she said, for 52-48 ratios, for balance, for the other side of the argument. It is absolutely the case that this country was told that its food would become cheaper if we left the European Union, and today we discover the consequences of that self-same Brexit include food becoming more expensive. Now, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you deal with that if you believed Jacob Rees-Mogg and his mates, who, of course, will be almost entirely untouched by the consequences of their own deceptions and disastrous ignorance. I don't know how you do it. How do you deal with the fact that you voted for cheaper food and you're getting more expensive food, and very, very annoying people on the radio, told you at the time that you were being lied to, and you insulted them, criticised them, possibly even announced that you were celebrating by drinking their Remainer tears, and they've turned out to be right about absolutely everything. Or no, let's not even do that. Let's not reach for hyperbole. Let's focus exclusively on this single issue. They've turned out to be right about food. They've turned out to be right about Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, I would like today to talk to you about your regrets, but history suggests that you might not be ready to do that in public. I hope you are. I've got absolutely no beef with you. It hasn't arrived yet. It's stuck in Dover, waiting to be checked. I've got absolutely no beef with you if you have seen the light. If you haven't seen the light, I have my minor beef because I think you're going to have to at some point. And the ease with which people can be persuaded to believe things. I've had a crash course this week in watching people believe things that are categorically untrue, who I genuinely thought would have slightly better skills, really, when it comes to processing actual evidence and proof. So promises that you believed have not been delivered. The exact opposite, instead, has been delivered. I want to know, can I tell you what I really want to know? Even though I'm acknowledging in the next breath that I don't think you're going to ring me today, which is why I'll ask a slightly different question in a moment. If you voted for this, if you voted for cheaper food and you're getting more expensive food, how do you want me to conduct these conversations moving forward? Can I ask you that question? How do you want me to conduct these conversations moving forward? And I can extend that invitation, of course, to everybody, even if you are, like me, a fully paid up member of the Told You So Club. How should we be conducting these conversations? Has the point been reached where the people still claiming the opposite of observable reality, the people who are being given cheaper food, being given more expensive food and who voted for cheaper food, and are still somehow claiming vindication or validation or pretending that they believe it was worth it? Have we reached the point where they deserve to be treated with as much contempt as the con men and con women that sold it to them? I am, between you and me, I'm leaning to that position now. That the bending over backwards to accommodate the ease with which you could be persuaded into a silly, nation-damaging, unpatriotic vote is pretty close to exhausted. But, I'm not sure. Rebecca is in Glasgow. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Hi, I voted to remain, but my mum voted to leave.
Right.
My mum was born to Polish immigrants,
and
gosh. I just couldn't understand, and I just felt like she was pulling up a ladder, and it was just, I was so angry with her. I've changed. That anger has turned to absolute sympathy when I see the regret in her face, and it's simple little things like she'll do a shop and she'll come on the phone to me and say, "God, those Polish things that I buy in the supermarkets they're not there, or they cost so much more," and it's just that there's this frustration in her now, but I don't blame voters any longer.
Has she joined the dots?
Yes, very much.
And therefore ruse the day?
Very much. And I think it's been down to successive governments.
Yeah.
Because everybody is manipulated in some way. And successive governments have sold off our industries. They've outsourced. We don't produce things anymore, we bring them in.
Yeah, it's a mad combination of circumstances, isn't it? And in fact, one of the sort of chief idiots was writing this week about, I think it was Frost or possibly Nick Timothy, one of the Daily Telegraph weirdos, was writing this week about, oh no, we need to make more, we need to manufacture more. And you're just, okay, but let's not pull ourselves out of the biggest single market in the world and then realise that we don't produce our own
That's exactly it. We just left ourselves
I
isolated.
can't believe I just said that out
Yeah.
loud. I haven't seen it that clearly before. Let's leave it. Let's leave it and then work out the consequences. Oh, my days.
So she regrets it, and I now have sympathy
Good.
for the people who bought into this, because we're all manipulated. Let's face it, in some way or another. At some point, we have that eureka moment.
Usually, yes, but I've had a crash course this week in watching people who would almost certainly have voted Remain and indeed see themselves as far too clever to fall for internet conspiracy theories, queuing up to shout their support for all manner of unevidenced nonsense. So that's how you can still love your mum. And how bad was the fracture? How bad was the falling out?
Oh, there were times when we couldn't even look each other in the eye.
Good grief. And who do you blame? Individuals that you blame, if you don't mind, or your mum blames, the people that, if you like, radicalised her?
Well, she blames, there was the TV programmes that she watched.
Yeah.
She literally would...
The fake balance.
Spout word for word. And the government. She blamed the government. She said, well, this is what they told us. I said, but I was trying to tell you something different. Yes, but. So, that's what made me angry, was the fact that I'm trying to show her, but she wasn't listening.
That, for me at least, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, for me at least, that's where the BBC actually was culpable. Not just people who were allowed to express opinions on the radio, but got it all horribly wrong. That's human fallibility in a way. But the BBC pretending, it's what Emily Maitlis calls it, the Minford paradigm, where they wouldn't tell you that there's only one economist in the building who is prepared to publicly state that Brexit is a good idea, and there are 5,000 convinced that it's awful. And yet if you watched it on the BBC, it was 50-50. It wasn't even 52-48. It was like, and that's how people like your mum ended up thinking. It's probably a good idea, and if it's not a great idea, it can't be that bad, because look, I'm watching Question Time, and the quotes, clever people, end quotes, are just disagreeing with each other, so it must be 50-50, never 50-50. Johnny's in Horsham. Johnny, what would you like to say?
Hi there. We spoke before, actually, about Corbyn. Yeah, it's in agreement to what you're saying, but if I can, I was just going to give a little explanation of the consequences further on than the cost of food.
Yes, of course. Briefly, though, because I am trying to focus on food today.
Yeah, no, it is food.
Go on,
I'll bridge it as best as possible. I live in an area where there was a huge fruit farm. Summer fruits, berries. These were picked normally by Eastern Europeans, predominantly Romanians.
Yes.
But because of Brexit, they all left for fear or for income or for whatever reason. They didn't come. And for 2 years subsequent, the harvest rotted because British people wouldn't work for that money for those hours. So what subsequently has happened is the guy who owned the farm has moved his business to Romania and is continuing. And the cost per punnet per unit is massively more. And he used to sell to Tesco, Sainsbury's, big supermarkets. It costs them massively more per tonne than it ever cost having it in the UK. But the consequence continues. What's happened to that land? He's put holiday homes on it.
Right.
So now people come and spend a couple of days in the summer and leave. In winter, the area's dark, it's shut. All the corner shops, the pubs, the chip shop, the petrol stations that these people used to use are gone.
Oh, that's...
Because there isn't...
Because it was... Well, hang on, because they're not... I mean, devil's advocate hat on. I don't want to doubt what you're telling me, but the holiday makers are going to contribute to the local economy.
No, they're holiday homes. They're families, not hundreds of people picking fruit.
Right.
The houses on there, the houses with land.
But that wouldn't be all year round, would it? They wouldn't be picking fruit all year.
But they're not going to get up every day and go to, you may
you're
have...
You're there, I believe. You've got no reason not to believe
I go through there to go surfing. Honestly, it's not my opinion. It's the opinion of the locals. And you can see the look of people who live there with this, we made a terrible decision. We got it wrong. And I just think we have to approach it with some kind of empathy. If you shout them down because they got it wrong, they'll get defensive. And I get people saying to me, oh, well, we voted to leave. We can't vote to change it. We voted to join in 75. We voted to leave in 20.
Yeah, but that's a big... I mean, that's
a...
16 to 30... It's nearly 40 years, isn't it? And it's going to be awful waiting that long. But you've reminded me of another story about Heineken. Have you seen the story about the orchards that Heineken have just ripped up? I'm wondering whether that's part of the same phenomenon that you described. There's Heineken owns Bulmers, the well-known cider brewer, and it wants to sell the land. I wonder if it is also looking at selling it to property developers. And before putting it on the market, they've torn up an orchard the size of 140 football pitches on the Offers Dyke Path in Monmouthshire.
It may well be. But the consequences is we're paying more for our summer berries and our summer fruits and our strawberries, as are the manufacturers that use them for cakes and jellies, like Kensey Foods in Cornwall that use them. It costs them more for the produce, and all the little corner shops that had all these people coming in don't have that. The consequences are vast. It's huge.
And not reported, and that's why I mean tone is important, but discussing it is incredibly important as well. 10:42 is the time. I'm just looking that up while listening to Johnny, and there's suggestions as well that it might be the decline in the cider market that has contributed to that decision as well. The National Association of Cider Makers saying 2,000 acres of British cider orchards have been lost in the past few years. And that the amount of cider being drunk in the UK has dropped by a third over the last 10. So I guess it's really important when you're dealing, in fact, not to spin the other way. So my suggestion that orchard devastation in Monmouthshire might be linked to the same phenomenon that Johnny was describing was not justified. I don't think it was justified. 10:43 is the time. Harry's in Chelmsford. Harry, what would you like to say?
Hiya.
Hello, Harry.
I'm a young person, and I've only been 21 years old, so I wasn't even able to vote for Brexit when it was about. And I think ever since it sort of appeared and hasn't disappeared, I suppose,
yes.
The country is sort of, declined in a way, especially for young people.
It's hard for you to measure it because it's all you've ever known, if you see what I mean. So you can imagine what freedom of movement would have been like. And you can today, an awful lot of people a lot older than you are finally beginning to realise what it meant to be in a single market, so that you could buy stuff that was in Berlin this morning. You can have it on your breakfast table by tomorrow, and there would be absolutely no friction or cost involved in any way different from how if it was coming in from Bath or Bristol. I mean, that is mad to get your head around. But you talk of decline. What do you mean when you talk of decline?
I think in more of a broader term, not just food related, but especially food related. It's going to cost more money to get healthier and more naturally grown foods. So it comes to that point of it's cheaper for people to get unhealthy, quick, fast foods.
That's another consequence. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And
then the country's health then starts to decline in that sense, and then it puts more pressure on the NHS. And it's all a big knock-on effect of everything. So everything has a consequence, and then everything...
and people won't be able to understand what's going on unless we talk about it and describe it in the way that you're doing, actually. How does it play at home? How does that vote split, how has that developed?
I mean, I contribute at home. I can't afford to move out anytime soon.
I mean the fact that your parents voted in different directions. Has one of them put their hands up and said they made a mistake, or is it just off the menu?
I think it's just been completely wiped the slate clean, and just no one talks about it. But I was a bit too young to sort of understand it at that time.
Of course.
And I'm trying to now. I'm at that sort of voting. I turned 18 during COVID, so there wasn't sort of any sort of votes about when I turned 18. So it's all coming about now, and I'm trying to educate myself on what's sort of there and what's about.
Well, I don't want to add to your burdens, Harry, but it might well be that it might fall to your generation to undo a lot of the damage done by us old people, or by whichever one of your parents it was that voted to become part of the first population in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. But it's not just young people. Chris has been in touch. I just presume Chris is older. And he simply says, forgive my ignorance, always. I always forgive ignorance. If you admit ignorance, it's always to be forgiven. I do realise we have left the EU, but the food coming in from the EU is not any different from before. So why do we now need the checks? Please explain, Chris. Treaties. treaties. It is simply the case that you have borders, national borders, international borders, over which countries exercise control, and if you all agree to pool resources to become part of the same single market, then you can sign treaties that deliver things like freedom of movement of goods, freedom of movement of labour, and freedom of movement of services. And if the rules say, if you sign up for one of those, you have to sign up for all three, then those are the only circumstances in which you can have freedom of movement of goods. So from the minute, and forgive me, Chris, if I've misunderstood your question and you already know all this, but from the minute that Theresa May decided that she had to appease the freedom of movement of people mob, i.e. abolish freedom of movement of people. And remember, people like Priti Patel until very recently were telling you to celebrate the abolition of your own freedom. So as soon as Theresa May decided to do that, then freedom of movement of goods was off the table. There were no circumstances in which we could abolish freedom of movement of people without sacrificing our membership of an organisation that enjoyed freedom of movement of goods. So those goods have to be checked coming in, not because of European Union rules, but because of World Trade Organisation rules, which, of course, the Brexit headbangers also insisted, without understanding anything, would be brilliant. 10:48 is the time. So that's an interesting one as well, the combination there of Harry's call and Chris's WhatsApp message, reminding us all of the importance of continuing to explain everything, even as people like Jacob Rees-Mogg have somehow scaled ever dizzier heights of delusion. Just simple, calm, honest explanation. Otherwise, if there is a vacuum of information, then all manner of madnesses can move into it. And sometimes I expect it's very hard to resist the temptation to sign up to the madness that has moved into a vacuum. But you should probably always resist that temptation. So on we go. Tim's in Banham in Norfolk. Tim, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I felt compelled to call after the lady that was on earlier talking about the conflict she had with her mother during the Brexit process. We experienced a very similar but even more bizarre situation in that my wife and my children enjoyed the freedoms of the European Union. We actually lived in France at the time, and our entire livelihood was linked to freedom of movement. We worked for an estate agency in France, and we sold an awful lot of properties to expats, etc.
Oh, wow.
And we had immense conflict within our families back in the UK, where family members were adamant that Brexit was a great thing. We tried to point out that their family benefited from freedom of movement, but they weren't buying it.
Yeah.
And I think the point I wanted to make, because there is a link to food in a minute, but the point I wanted to make was that I'm now watching the exact same lies being told through the media channels, that these same family members are now believing the lies about the immigration, the lies about the NHS, all the NHS woes as far as they're concerned is because of junior doctor strikes. And it's frightening that we keep recycling this same situation where the people that are responsible for these lies are not held to account. You touched on it earlier. You touched on it earlier this week or last week, when you were talking about Chris Philp. He then gets to go on BBC on Sunday morning and defend his rhetorical question, and nobody really
pushed back. Well, that might be a consequence of who presents that programme. But the idea that he got a free pass on claiming that, it was a rhetorical question when he clearly needed to clarify whether Congo and Rwanda were the same country, and clearly is utterly unaware that the 12 refugees who were shot dead in Rwanda in, I think, 2018 were actually from Congo, and that, actual war in that corner of the world is sponsored by the country into which we're sending refugees. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously territory that I'm quite familiar with, the idea that there are no consequences. But the stop the boat stuff, that is landing, is it, with your older relatives?
Absolutely. And you stand there and you go, well, hold on a minute. Since Brexit, immigration's gone up.
Yes.
And they won't have it. You're saying, well, hold on, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris told you it wasn't going to, we were going to stop immigration, because let's be honest, that's what Brexit was about. It wasn't about.
It wouldn't have got
Frenchman
over the
making
line. It's why Cummings sort of held his nose a bit, or pretended really to disapprove about Farage. Although what Vote Leave did on Facebook in the final days of the campaign was every bit as grim as what Farage has been peddling for years. But Cummings wanted to believe that it was some sort of noble mission. They would hold their noses and get into bed with the people peddling racism or xenophobia. But I don't think it was enough to get it over the line. They kind of needed both. It was so close. Yep. They definitely needed the racists, but I think the racists needed them as well, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Good people who thought their food would be cheaper. There you go. There's nothing wrong with that. A good person who thought their food would be cheaper. They've got nothing to be ashamed of.
And when it was pointed out, so you've had the text this morning, Project Fear, give it a rest, just ludicrous. The facts are, I'm a caterer by trade.
Right.
My business, I've been absorbing meat price increases for the last 9 months.
Yeah.
And we're sort of sitting there going, well, we're taking bookings for 2025 now. I'm going to have to roll those increases out. I've had an email this week from my greengrocer, so I use a local greengrocer. They try and get everything they can locally, and in Norfolk, we're very lucky in Norfolk.
Yes.
Have a great supply of fresh produce, but an awful lot at this time of year. All my tomatoes are still coming through Holland because the English tomatoes aren't ready yet,
sure.
or the good ones. So, I'm waiting for the price list increase there, and you just sort of hold your head in your hands, looking at ever diminishing returns, going, all of which could have been resolved.
And all of which were known and plotted and predicted. You mentioned greengrocery. My friend Andreas, who's been on the programme many times and has, as Kieran the van driver did before him. I haven't heard from Kieran for a while. I hope he's all right. That they would explain this stuff to us all the time. And they, having appeared on this programme, then got booked by other news organisations, Sky News, ITN, the BBC, because somehow the failure of the movement, the Remain movement, to get these people in front of the public was quite incredible. And that brings us back to, I think, to Cameron and Corbyn. Tim, thank you. It's a lovely part of the world, that. Near Dis. I don't know why I do this. I try to show off my knowledge of British geography sometimes. It's because I'm conscious of this sometimes being a bit of a London-centric show. But I do love Norfolk, and I do have problems with the county when it comes to Brexit. But last time what would the word be, criticised farmers for having been in support of Brexit, I got into terrible trouble with people pointing out that the people that owned the land were not necessarily farming it. The NFU might have been a little bit lily-livered perhaps, and we associated all those signs that we saw on all that farmland with the idea that all the farmers were desperate for Brexit, and that was probably a misrepresentation. Well, definitely a bit of a misrepresentation, which I'm happy to correct. But speaking of British farmers, a couple of texts come in saying, well, it's great because now we can buy British food. Now we can buy more British food. I have to refer you to a story from yesterday's news describing the washout winter, spelling price rises for UK shoppers with key crops down by a fifth. So the impact of the weather on wheat, barley, oats and oilseed rape harvests means that you're going to see price rises on your beer, your bread, your biscuits and more, even if we weren't also introducing extra costs on the stuff that we're bringing in from other countries. So food security is a wonderful thing, and we could almost certainly benefit from having more of it. But food security is never guaranteed. So, and this again is something that Jacob Rees-Mogg has done to you. Jacob Rees-Mogg has turned you into the person this morning, trying so hard to pretend that you haven't been swindled, that you're saying, well, actually, I think you'll find that this means we can eat more British food. Well, falls to me to remind you that the UK has had the wettest 18-month period since records began in 1836. I'll say that again. The UK has had the wettest 18-month period since records began in 1836. And when it comes to climate change, what do the people who sold you Brexit and are currently trying to turn you against benefits claimants and refugees, what do they usually have to say about climate change? Same people, right? I mean, what's the opposite of a conspiracy theory? something that's true, but is treated like a conspiracy or is completely ignored. So the people that brought you Brexit, currently trying to demonise refugees, already embarked upon a government-sponsored policy to demonise welfare claimants. The farmers can't grow the food that we need to replace the food that costs too much or costs much more to import because climate has affected the crops in the worst way since records began in 1836. But they'll be queuing up tomorrow to tell you that climate change or net zero is some sort of con as well. Quite a few of you, and I like this because it means you were paying attention back in 2016, 2017, quite a few of you asking what happened to Digby Pudding Jones, who was often wheeled out to speak in favour of Brexit from a position of almost abject ignorance. And the short answer is I don't know. And when people disappear from public life, he popped up a couple of years ago to slag off the accent of, I think it was Alex Scott, one of the sports presenters on the BBC, but I don't know, and therefore, you have to hope he's well. But I don't know what you want your formerly prominent Brexiteers to do. Do you want them to disappear from public life and stay silent? Or do you want them to take a seat in the House of Lords and do a lap of honour like Daniel Hannan? Or do you want them to carry on writing bilge for the Daily Telegraph and others? I would have thought that probably self-imposed silence was the most honourable course, up to the point where they find the courage, the conviction and the integrity to come forward and say sorry to the entire country.